What is going on, vinyl community? Welcome to the first ever episode of Conversations with the Record Spinner. And in this first episode, I am joined by the very wonderful Hazel English. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. For those that are not aware, Hazel English has been around for how long has it been? 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, about 5 years now.
Yeah, she just released her, not just recently, but this year in 2020, she released her first full-length album, Wake Up. And then before that, we also got a double EP called Just Give In and Never Going Home. These are both available on Polyvinyl Records. Just absolutely fantastic releases. Real quick, before we get into the nitty gritty of all of it, you're originally from Australia and then you relocated to California, if I'm correct?
Yes.
So what exactly is your background? What brought you here to the United States and what exactly was your journey?
Yeah, so about 7 years ago, I moved to the Bay Area to study. I was doing like a study abroad
Okay.
thing, if you will. And yes, so I was only supposed to stay for about 6 months. And yeah, that was 7 years ago. So, clearly, I have an affinity for California.
That's awesome. What were you studying?
Creative writing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
What kind of creative writing do you usually specify? And is it like poetry, short story, or?
Yeah, both. I write poetry, but I also write science fiction stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was working on a novel.
Wow.
Yeah, I kind of like set that stuff aside when I decided to pursue music full time, but it's still a passion of mine, and I have a writing group and stuff like that, so I still do a lot of writing as well.
That's cool. Will this novel ever see the light of day?
I hope so. I just need to get around to like going back and finishing it. And
Okay.
finding somebody to publish it. But yeah, I do think about it a lot, and I'm like, I should really finish that book.
I was gonna say, I'm sure everyone would love to read it and see what entails with it. Maybe tied in with the next album, perhaps.
Maybe.
Now, since that was your primary thing, did you ever delve into music while you were still at home in Australia?
Yeah, I was playing music a lot. It's definitely a passion. I think, you know, I always like loved to play music and express myself that way and write songs. But it wasn't until like about 6 years ago that or 5 years ago, whenever it was that I started putting out music, that I really decided to pursue it like actively, and just throw myself fully into it and give it everything. Up until that point, I think I was just kind of like dabbling and doing other things, but there came a point where it's like, okay, I'm really gonna take that leap and put everything into this.
Nice. Would you say that, like, with with doing music and also with creative writing, do you feel like you really tap into your creative writing abilities within music, or do you just kind of scratch the surface with that once you have to like work in melodies and chord structures and whatnot?
I mean, I think it's just a different process for me, but like I think I'm always like tapping into that side. But yeah, I definitely approach it differently than if I was writing a poem or something.
Okay.
Because when songwriting for me, the melody always comes first, so that kind of dictates like the rhythm of the words and the lyrics. And also, you have to factor in certain things, like some words don't sing well. or they don't sound great when you're singing them. So it's almost like a more simplified version for me than like if I'm writing a poem, I can be a bit more wordy or you know, it's a bit more free. There's not as many restrictions, I guess.
Okay. Now, with your work, I sense a lot of, I guess the best way I could describe it is like psychedelic indie pop. Would you say that that's an accurate kind of label?
Sure, yeah.
What kind of factors did you like, were you attracted to in that kind of culture that you wanted to work into your own musical work? Like what facets of that kind of psychedelic idealism did you like, were you attracted to?
I think like I've always been drawn to music that's like kind of mellow but also very like dreamy. I really like music that's kind of like intense and harsh. Like I can't deal with that kind of music because I don't know. I guess I'm like sensitive to that kind of thing, and uh, yeah, for whatever reason, like I'm just drawn to music that's really warm and like kind of hypnotic
Okay.
in a way. And the way that I like to, you know, like sing and the aesthetic of my vocals, like I love having lots of layers and
Hmm.
like a lot of reverb and stuff. So I guess I'm just drawn to that kind of general vibe, but also like in general with the album I put out this year, like I was really drawing on a lot of 60s music for that record in particular. Mainly just because like I think, you know, the 60s was such an experimental time, and like I felt like that was really in line with like the sentiments that I was trying to express on the album. And I wanted it to feel really dynamic and really live sounding.
Absolutely. Since you mentioned that you don't really go too much towards the more harsher kind of like genres and bands, what is the harshest band that you would consider yourself to be a fan of?
To be a fan of? Oh, that's an interesting question. Um, I mean, I sometimes listen to like top 40 pop music just because I like the songwriting, but
Mhm.
I find like my sensibilities tend to steer away from like pop production. But I still, you know, can really appreciate the excellent songwriting. So, you know, surprisingly, like I'll sometimes get into like, I don't know, some Justin Bieber song or like, like Halsey. I think Halsey's really great. I don't know, like things like that, you know, have a bit more of like a shiny, packaged, polished production sound. Like,
Okay.
um, yeah, I'll listen to it mainly for the songwriting aspect, because you know, at the end of the day, I enjoy writing pop music and putting it in like an indie format in terms of production.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely get a lot of pop sensibilities with your work, but it just sounds so much aesthetically cooler than like what is really dominating on like top 40 radio. So I totally get what you mean. Um, on my channel, I usually cover like a lot of like older artists and bands and such, like the classics, Beatles, Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and all. If you were to pitch your sound to a person like an old soul that really gravitates towards that kind of stuff, which artist do you think you could draw comparisons from?
Oh, well, that's tough.
I hope I'm not putting you on the spot or anything.
I think it's hard to ever compare yourself to like greats, you know? Like I can never assume that I'm even in the ballpark, but I could tell you like what records I was influenced by when I was working on the record, and maybe if you like those albums or those artists, you'll enjoy it. I think for me, heavily, I was listening to Jefferson Airplane, the Zombies, the Beatles, the Mamas and the Papas. The Doors are a big one for me.
Nice.
You know, Fleetwood Mac's a band I always come back to. My favorite ever artist of all time would be Sam Cooke. So those are just a few of my influences. Yeah, but
That's
again, it's so hard to like compare yourself to anybody or like even know what you sound like. Like that's what, you know, I let other people do that for me because I'm not thinking about that when I'm making music.
of
I'm
course.
just trying to like make good music. But I'm never coming at it from an aspect of like, oh, I really want it to sound like this band meets this band. Like I'm not like that.
That's cool.
I think like when you start getting down to that, it's almost like too on the nose, you know? And like I'm not really interested in recreating something that already exists.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, maybe I'll ask you what would you say? What's someone you would think of that was
Ooh. Now I'm on the spot. Crap. I'll have to come back to that.
it's not that easy.
That's really tough. But since you mentioned Beatles, what would you say? Just this is out of common curiosity. What's your favorite Beatles album?
Revolver, I think.
Good choice.
Yeah. But it's hard. It's really hard because they're all very amazing.
I mean, each album in itself is a masterpiece to some extent, but then again, there's just some that rose to the occasion, I suppose, more than others.
Right.
Like for me, my go-to is Rubber Soul. Like that whole folky Bob Dylan-esque kind of period. I'll take that anytime. But
Yeah, I love
Revolver,
that album.
it's like they're like brother and sister, Rubber Soul and Revolver. They could have
Yeah.
easily been part 1 and 2, hands
I
down.
feel like that. I almost feel like I think of them together when I think of them.
Yeah, for sure. But to touch real quick on Wake Up, the album, which I have to say, I'm not saying this because you're here, but this was one of the few shining moments of 2020 here. This
Aw.
is one of the best albums that I heard this year. My best friend and I, we spent the entire summer listening to this album. I turn her on to your music and she's now a huge fan.
Oh, thank you.
Of course. What would you say is the biggest difference between an album like this and releases such as these?
I think the production value is pretty different. I mean, the whole process was very different. Like the two EPs I recorded in a bedroom setup, you know, pretty much just like me and Jackson, we just like wrote a lot of the songs, and then some of the songs I also wrote with Dave, who's also in the band, and then we took it to Jackson. But it was like me and two other people pretty much. Whereas um, the album was kind of born out of a lot of demos from sessions with lots of different people, and then I worked on it with two different producers, and we had session players. We had really legit recording studios. So it was definitely like a more elevated kind of setup, and I think it's like a more of a live sounding record. But I enjoyed them both in their own ways. Like I love how like lo-fi the double EP is, and how like you know, warm it feels, and you know, I love how immediate the process was, because some of those songs, you know, we wrote and recorded in a day, and it was just like there was just no like hesitation. It was kind of like, yeah, let's do it. Like it was a very quick process, and I love that. And you know, with the album, there was a lot more thought and steps and going back and refining, and there was, you know, sometimes lots of different iterations of a song before it got to the finished product. So yeah, it's just kind of like opposite ends of the spectrum for me in terms of the approach.
I was gonna say I definitely got a very like heavy lo-fi kind of vibe from the double EP, whereas the album is this very spit polished, fresh sounding album. And I was actually quite curious. Did any of the songs that appear on this were they left over from the double EP, or were you specifically saving and writing with this thing in mind?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I mean, yeah, I not to do that. Like, I mean, I have tons of songs that will never see the light of day, but I tend not to save them because then they don't feel as current.
Okay.
And I try not to get too attached to songs, you know? It's like I'm not always gonna write an amazing song every time. So it's important to like see which ones are worth releasing and which ones are worth just not, sharing. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's a numbers game. And the more songs I write, the more likely I'll get a few great ones that I want to share. But I'm
Okay.
not gonna like share every song that I write.
I see what you mean. And for my I mean, I'm a musician myself and I totally get that notion. Like sometimes when you're writing, it's almost like just an exercise in just still being creative and
Right.
just the final outcome is what it is. Like you can revise and edit as much as you want, but it's all based on your preference and what you feel is worthy of being featured on an album and such. So I totally understand what you mean. But to kind of touch up on the songs themselves, I love the way it just flows. Like right off at the very beginning, you have Shaking, Wake Up, Off My Mind, and Combat, and Five and Dime. Like all like what do they say? Bangers? Is that what they call like the hits?
Oh, thank you.
It's like they're all at the front, like it's in your face, like right from the start. Now, when you were making this album, like were you hands-on with the sequencing and how it flows as a whole?
I mean, I not until the end, like I didn't think about it at all. And then I'm really glad you appreciate the track listing because it took me ages to figure it out.
Really?
I was going crazy because I was like, I don't know, like I was just so in my head about it. Like I think I made like 10 different track lists
Oh,
before.
wow.
Yeah, like just I couldn't decide. I don't know, like it's one of those things. Yeah, I definitely didn't think about it before I went into it. Maybe if I had, I would have spent so much time trying to figure out like which songs should go in which order. But I'm glad it worked out. I'm glad.
It really did. It's absolutely brilliant. It's just like I said, right off the bat, it's just it hits you right there. All like the singles that you released off of it and the various videos and stuff, they're all up in like the front end, and it's just an absolutely thrilling listening experience indeed. Because when it comes, with me listening to records and all, like sure, everyone goes on about the sound quality and all, but I love how it brings it all together as a whole, which, that's the way Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys heard Rubber Soul. Like he just loved it as a whole, and that's what he wanted to do with an album like Pet Sounds. And
Right.
so that I think is something that should be taken into account for any record that's made. I mean, of course, when you're working on it, you have these songs ready, but then, like you said, like you almost worked out towards the end how it was going to go. But since you had mentioned that it went through like 10 variations, like you don't have to go too in depth, but like, what were some of the initial drafts like? Like, did a different song plan to open the album, or like, what
Uh,
was your thought process?
I mean, I always knew the first and the last track. I always knew it would start with one like in with Work It Out, but it was mainly in like the middle section that I was struggling to figure out the order. And I'm trying to remember what other orders I had. But I think Like a Drug was like towards the beginning in one of the first iterations. Like it was like third or something. Yeah, I'm trying to remember now. But I think also knowing, I mean, you probably, or someone, a listener might not know who produced which song, but for me, I knew that 5 of the songs were produced by Justin Raisin and 5 of the songs were produced by Ben Allen. So I was also aware of like, are these songs going to flow well with each other? Like that was one other consideration for me to make sure it felt seamless and not like you're being kind of
Yeah.
like pulled back and forth.
Did you have a chance to pick the producers yourself that you wanted to work with on the record?
Yes.
What
Yeah.
made you choose Ben Allen, just out of curiosity? Because he did, see if I can actually grab a copy. It's all the way down there, but he did an album with a band called the Kaiser Chiefs back in
Yeah.
like 2014, and it's fantastic. I was just curious on what your, mindset was at when it came to who you chose to work with.
Yeah, I was just a big fan of like the albums he's worked on and the artists he's worked with, like especially like the Deer Hunter records. That, I mean, for me, like I love Deer Hunter, and the albums are great. So like I don't know, I like love the aesthetic of the records and the vibe, and um I was just very excited that he wanted to work with me, and and it was just such a great fit. Like a lot of the times you don't know what it's going to be like until you're actually there in the studio. So it is kind of a risk because you you don't know how well you're or how compatible your working styles are, but it was just such a great fit. Like immediately I knew working with Ben that it was going to be really fun and awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, this year, excuse me, you originally had plans to do a U.S. tour, which was in the spring, I want to say.
Yeah.
Do you have plans to get back on the road once everything is basically given the green light to resume with, I guess, normal life if that's even a concept at this point?
Right. I mean, yeah, when it's safe, but it's just so hard to know when that will be at this
Yeah,
point. So I'm not even thinking about it right now because
mhm,
it feels like a long way off.
for sure.
And there's so much speculation, and I think people are so quick to be so optimistic about how early it will be, but like I'm just not as optimistic. I'm trying to be more of a realist and be like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to book or reschedule again and then have to change it again,
Oh, yeah.
Um, so I'm kind of waiting it out to see what happens, and then once I, you know, can kind of guarantee that it'll be a safe time, then I'll start thinking about it. But
Fingers crossed.
yeah.
I know I have Kiss tickets for next summer, and even I think it's probably not going to happen.
Really? Oh yeah, it's tough because all of us really want to go, and we want to believe that it'll be a thing sooner rather than later. But at the same time, I don't want to like get people's hopes up
Of course.
either, until it's like, yeah, until it and I don't want to risk anybody's health either.
Of
So
course. Yeah, that's the big primary concern for sure.
yeah.
Um, have you given any consideration into a follow-up to Wake Up, or do you just approach it when the time is ready?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working on demos for whatever the next project is, and that's been really fun. I'm definitely like figuring out the vibe of that right now, and
Okay.
I'm enjoying that process. I really like the writing process, and the part where you're just kind of like playing around and you're not, you know, too worried yet about like figuring all the details out.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. And again, like I don't know when I'll be able to get into a recording studio and things like that. So um, I it's so hard to make like concrete plans at this point, and all I can do is just like work on the songs and get them, you know, get a batch of songs, and then when the time's ready, then like I can figure out the recording process.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome. Looking forward
Yeah.
whenever that comes out.
Thanks.
Fingers crossed it's soon. So
Yeah.
since this is a vinyl-based YouTube channel, of course, we're
Yep.
going to discuss the format of vinyl. Do you have a personal connection with the vinyl format?
Yeah, I do. I really love vinyl. I love the fact that it's like a very purpose driven. I mean, when I say purpose, I mean like if I'm putting on a record, like a vinyl, I'm really listening. I'm not just like having it on in the background. I'm not like tuning out like I might do with a playlist on Spotify, whatever. And I'm listening to the whole album. And I personally do, like you, really connect with the album format. You know, there's some albums that I just listen to almost every day. And it's like, you know, the next song that's going to happen. And I kind of love that you anticipate it, and
Mm-hmm.
it feels like this familiar journey. So, yeah, I really like that. And obviously, I love how warm it sounds, and things like that.
Would you consider yourself a collector, a casual buyer, or just someone that like can really appreciate the format for all the beautiful factors that it contributes?
Uh, I guess I'm somewhere in between.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't consider myself a collector because I don't really have the money or space for that.
Okay.
I really enjoy the process of like going to a record store and like finding, you know, or discovering albums that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's really cool also to find out about records that like not that many people know about too.
Yeah.
That's always fun. But yeah, I can't say I'm just like buying records all the time, because like again, I don't have the time. I mean, not the time. I don't have the space for that, or like the income to just buy and buy
Yeah.
vinyl all the time. But I'm yeah, with vinyl, I'm very particular. Like I have to really either I really love an album and I just want to have it on vinyl, or I'm, you know, it's the opposite where I see this interesting looking record at a record store and I'm like, this looks fun. I want to try this.
Okay. Now, since you mentioned like going to record stores and just seeing what's there, did you ever do the classic like musician move where like whether it was your album or if anything, it would be your double EP since your album came out once the pandemic was going on? Did you ever go to a record store just to find your work in the bins just to see for yourself?
No, not really. I can't say I've ever like gone to a record store for that purpose. Like
Okay.
sometimes it's just been there, happened to be there, but I don't like search for it.
Gotcha. Do you have any records on hand that you would like to show on camera? Anything in particular that you like, favorites?
Yeah, so this I'll show you a record that's one of my favorites,
Okay.
and I got it during the pandemic. Actually, they just did a reissue because this album is kind of, well, it's one of those ones that a lot of people don't know about. You might know it.
Oh, what is that?
This is Margot Goyen, and she basically was a songwriter in the 60s. She made this amazing record, and it's just an amazing record. But basically what happened was she didn't want to tour the record, and so her label buried her album basically.
Oh,
Yeah, and didn't promote it at all, which is so sad, because I honestly think this record would just like I think she would have become really big. Uh, yeah, but somebody told me about it and I started listening to it online and I was like, oh my goodness, this is an amazing album. But it's one of those ones that, you know, only collectors knew about, and
yeah.
it was really hard to find. But then Vinyl Me Please just did like a reissue.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I think it's still available.
Interesting.
So now I have it on vinyl, which is really great. But yeah, this album really also influenced my record too a lot.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and you know, she's getting a bit like this album is finding more listeners now through like Spotify and stuff, which is cool.
That's awesome.
But yeah, it's still, I still just like, every time I listen to it, I'm like, wow, so many more people could enjoy this record if only they knew about it.
That's awesome. I'm gonna have to check that out for myself. And I think it's the fact that Vonomy Please jumped on it, because that subscription service already has such like a tight knit following that it of course subjects people to that stuff. But I always love that, that sort of that hero story of just an album was recorded but just never came out, or it became obscured in the sands of time. It's such a fascinating insight.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't know. I'm just really inspired by her, because she basically was like, she basically said like, no, I'm not gonna, you know, tour just because you want me to tour. Like, clearly she
Yeah.
wanted to write songs. That was
Yeah.
her strength. And back then, I just think labels were like, well, we don't know what to do with you, so we're gonna just,
Yeah.
we're not gonna promote you at all. And to me, I'm like, I just think that was such a ballsy move for her to be like, okay, well, whatever. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna.
Yeah. Usually like most musicians, like that's their one like kind of stab at fame, and they're willing to do anything. But
Yeah,
that's
she just decided to become like a music teacher.
wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Just the way you were describing it, how like, she didn't want to tour, but yet the label was just like, well, what are we going to do with it? It kind of reminds me, and perhaps you're aware of him, Nick Drake.
Yeah, yeah.
Like basically maybe did a handful of live appearances, very shy individual, but his music is just absolutely beautiful. It's his records are like perfect rainy day records. It's just something that you can just kind of vibe out to, as it's kind of like an overcast day. It's beautiful, in all honesty.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sad that like as an artist, within the music industry, there's still so much pressure to like fit this certain mold, and if you don't do everything in this specific way, like, you know, I mean, I don't know. It's just, to me, like, as an artist, you want to express yourself freely, and often that takes different forms and ways of doing things, but it's not very compatible with like the music industry, which has a very set way of doing things.
Yeah. Is it more flexible in the indie realm since you're on Polyvinyl, or are there still certain things that you feel that you have to meet in order to fit a certain, I don't know if you can say fit a certain mold, but like, are you able to be a bit more flexible with your craft while being on an indie label?
I think so, like probably more so than if you're on a major label,
Yeah.
for sure. But it's just you're always very aware of like, you know, I think for artists, it's hard to come to terms with the fact that like at the end of the day, we're making a product. We don't want to see it as a product. It's our art.
Yeah.
But in the industry, they're just kind of like, okay, but we need to be able to sell this as a product. So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, it's this uncomfortable thing where like art meets commerce.
Yeah, it's basically returning on investments.
Right.
I'm studying music business for my bachelor's degree, so I totally understand it completely.
Yeah.
To get back on the vinyl topic
Yeah.
though, in your neck, do you have anything else that you wanted to show real quick, or was that the only major one that you pulled?
I have some other albums here.
Please show.
So I will show you some albums that I've just discovered by accident. Almost like, basically I found these albums by like going to record stores and seeing these amazing covers and being like, okay, this looks really cool. And then, subsequently they are really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like one of them.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. Um, I'm trying to remember where I can't really oh, this one's from Jackknife Records, which is in Atwater. And I believe they've been closed during the pandemic, but I don't know if they might have a website,
Okay.
but I'm not sure. This one too.
Herbie Man. Loud sound of fluid bond. Interesting.
Yeah, this is really cool one. And then this one.
We have Dan State south of the border. Nice.
Yeah, like albums like this, I just know I'm gonna like them because
Yeah,
they're like so much fun and just like so like just make me want to dance and move around and
that's awesome.
yeah. So that's like an example of some records where I had no idea what they would be like, but I just was like, this looks awesome and I'm gonna try it.
Basically blind buys, essentially. You're buying it just kind of based on the
Yeah,
cover or something alone.
exactly.
I've kind of done that in the past, like just like historic albums, really. Like the first one that you showed, like there was a whole entire backstory to that. There's one album in particular, you might find it interesting. I have it right here somewhere. See, you came prepared for this. I didn't. I'm ashamed. I don't know if you've ever seen or heard about this record. The band's called Public Nuisance.
Okay.
Gotta
Nope.
Survive. I've
Okay.
showed this a couple times on my channel. So this Public Nuisance was a band that was looked after by a guy by the name of Terry Melcher, who was a producer in the late 60s and such. They recorded this album, but then somewhere in early 69, Terry Melcher had leased a house to Sharon Tate. And the rest is kind of history. Terry Melcher got involved in everything that went on in that summer of 69. He freaked out, went into hiding, and this album never came out.
Whoa, really?
I
Wait,
think it came out like in the
involved.
like what's that?
What do you mean he got involved? Like how?
Well, for the fact that Sharon Tate was a victim in the whole Charles
Right.
Manson thing, and because it was his house that he gave to her for like X amount of time, something like that. So of course he got involved in that whole thing, and that's, the rest is history. So this album never came out. I think it was out on CD like in the early 2000s on some label, but Jack White of Third Man Records got a hold of the tapes and he put it out on his record label. And this is something that I think you would really, really like. It's a bit like psych heavy in places, like a little harsh and heavy, but like for the most part, very of the time, these guys were absolutely talented. It's just it brews of 60s proto-punk psychedelia almost is the best way to describe it.
Okay.
Which is fairly interesting. This is a really great record, and I'll show a rather common album. You didn't mention this band, but I figured I'll show it off. They're my second favorite band. Kiss is always number one. Let me grab it real quick. See if I can find it. You a fan of this album?
Oh yeah, awesome.
Piper at the Gates of Dawn by Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
Syd Barrett, one of the late 60s geniuses. I mean, his writing was so different, full of like fairy tale influences, and just they had such a charm. And like this album is unlike any other Pink Floyd album that came out, basically after. But this is, I mean, have you actually ever listened to this album or heard any tracks off of it?
Yeah, I mean, well, my dad was a big Pink Floyd fan, so I grew up listening to a lot of Pink Floyd. And he was really into the earlier stuff too. And like he's always, he always gets into like the history and stuff like that, and like telling me about, the band members and their side projects and everything.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he goes total fanboy basically.
Yeah. And like I feel like a lot of the Christmas gifts I've given him over the years have just been like live concerts of his favorite bands, because he just like watches that all the time.
It's like you distracted him for 2 hours. It's all good.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And based around in the area of California that you're at, what are some of the notable record stores in your neck of the woods?
Well, like Jackknife, the one I mentioned earlier, is probably my favorite, but again, it's been closed during the pandemic, so I don't know what's going on. I hope they're okay. Like, I hope they survive this time. And where else? There's a few, I think, permanent records. I think there's like one in Highland Park, or yeah, there's a few of them around. I haven't actually been to a record store during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of something I haven't been doing as much lately. And that makes me a little sad. But I also, I'm trying to be as safe as possible. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this year I haven't bought as many records just because I haven't been going shopping as much, unfortunately.
I got you.
Yeah.
In the times like prior before the pandemic, have you ever checked out Amoeba Records?
Yeah, I've definitely been to Amoeba a few times. Like, it's like places like that are great because they have so many options. Yeah. I think I honestly like tend to go to the smaller record stores.
Okay.
Yeah, because for me it's more about finding albums I didn't know existed, and I think when you have a big store like Amoeba, it can be a little overwhelming to just like look through. So I think I tend to go towards the like smaller, more boutique-y type of record stores.
Okay.
Where I know I can find like something, they'll have an exotica section or something, like, you know, obscure stuff. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Amoeba has an exotica section. That would be really cool if they did. But.
Well, I think it's also like stores. I mean, I've never been to Amoeba. I've never made my way to the West Coast, period.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully one day that'll change. I need to get out of Jersey.
Well, what's the record store that you go to the most?
So the closest one to me is about a half hour away. It's located within the Hamilton Mall in Mays Landing. It's called the Rock Shop. I've done lots of videos there. Their selection is great. The staff is awesome. They know me on a name basis since I'm in there often. Yeah. And usually pick up all kinds of cool stuff there. But the one I've been more frequent at is actually an hour away, which is kind of on the way to Philadelphia. It's a place called Sky Valley Records. Very small place. There's like bins and boxes of records just everywhere. Like, you look down, like you'll see like a rack full of stuff, and then you look underneath and there's more stuff, and it's like, right. Like where do you even start? But his selection is absolutely fantastic. Like, I did a record.
Or is it near Philly?
What's that?
Is this in Philly or near Philly?
It's near.
Okay, because I do remember going to a really good record store in Philly, and I just don't remember what it was called.
But... Oh, I was going to ask you which one, because there's a couple I've been to. There's Juno Records on South Street.
Okay.
And then there's also Long in the Tooth, which is near Rittenhouse Square.
I'm really bad with names, so I can't remember what it was called, but I do remember it had like a downstairs thing, and the guy was helpful.
That might be Juno, because they had it downstairs.
Like a cafe upstairs. Anyway, this was like a few years ago, and we were touring, and
okay.
Yeah. I'll have to try and find out what that store was called.
That's it. It sounds like it might be Juno, but I'm not sure about the cafe upstairs. But no, that's really, really awesome. Real quick before we wrap up, which social media profiles are you active on for people to stay informed on all of your musical endeavors?
I mean, I'm on all of them, but probably I spend the most time on Instagram. But I also have a Patreon, which I'm very active on, and that's how. Yeah, obviously you know that. But yeah, pretty much anywhere you want to go, I have, except for Tumblr. I stopped updating my Tumblr like earlier this year.
Gotcha.
But I don't know if anyone still uses Tumblr.
I think some people do. I mean, I haven't touched mine for years. And I cringed at like the personal blog posts because like I was still in high school and adolescence and everything. It's so cringeworthy.
Yeah. No, I mean, we all have an old Tumblr stashed away somewhere.
That or MySpace. One or the other.
Yeah, check me out on MySpace.
Yeah.
I don't have a MySpace.
Oh my gosh. Well, Hazel, thank you so much for joining me in this very first episode. Like I mentioned, Hazel English available on Polyvinyl Records. And just for the sake of showing, these are beautifully put together. Nice gatefold sleeves. And if you're a colored vinyl enthusiast, this is the red variant. And then this one here, I'm sure you've seen these showcased or have seen them at one point. There's like a nice baby blue vinyl and a nice pastel yellow. These are all available online on Polyvinyl Records. Are these on your website as well, or is it linked to the label?
Yeah, you can find it on my website or on Polyvinyl.
Awesome, awesome. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. And if you did, please go ahead, give it a like, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support this channel, be sure to check me out on Patreon. Perhaps check out Hazel's Patreon as well. See you guys in the next video. And most importantly, keep the records spinning.